So it's time in this rapid fire panel to move on to the next panelist. I'm delighted to introduce Rilla Khaled. She's an associate professor in the Department of Digital and Computation Arts at Concordia University, also in Canada. We have a lot of great games scholars in Canada. They're representing today. And she teaches interaction design, serious game design, programming, other subjects. She directs a really interesting lab up there, the Technoculture Arts and Games Research Center in the Milieu Institute for Arts, Culture, and Technology. And her research is focused on the use of interactive technologies to improve the human condition, which I love. So please tell us more about that, Rilla.
Thank you so much for the introduction. So I'm a computer scientist who works with HCI, design, and playful media. And because HCI evokes different things to different people, in my work, it relates to psychology, education, games, artificial intelligence, and interaction design. While epistemologically and methodologically, this is always complicated things, my research has usually embraced these entanglements, these threads of topics that turn out to have sticky affinities. But let's be less pretentious, let's just call these knots. So one of these knots is culture and games. And this knot has turned up in my work for 15 years now, starting with my PhD research on culturally relevant persuasion. And the TLDR for those years of work is that culturally relevant technologies have an outsized impact on racialized communities. So more recently, I've been involved in the running of a workshop series called Skins, led by Jason Lewis and Scawanati Fragnito, and which focuses on Indigenous futurisms, which is a term coined by Jason. So this photo is from a 2018 workshop, and in this session, we were uncovering mechanics expressed in traditional games. So in theory, this work is about amplifying Indigenous voices and perspectives in digital spaces. In practice, it's about lowering barriers of entry for Indigenous folks to game making and the games industry. With this workshop, we've continuously honed our approach for bringing culturally significant values and narratives into games. And with recent iterations, we've explored questions like, what would it mean to have a game about space exploration which actively engages with decolonization? And how do we make language playable? So that knot turns out to be linked to another current research project of mine called speculative play. So let me explain how. If Indigenous futurisms get us to imagine futures in which Indigenous folks are present and empowered and uses games to do so, then speculative play is about exploring social and cultural questions via the guise of possible near futures, but presented through playful interactions with familiar digital interfaces. So one such question concerns Quebec's difficult relationship with religious diversity. So in recent years, bills have been passed which ban women from wearing niqab, ban these women from working in the public sphere and benefiting from public services. So just last week, Switzerland also voted to ban niqab. So this is not an issue that's going away. So neocub is a speculative play experience that presents a dystopian workaround for cultural and religious tolerance for the purpose of getting people to experientially grapple with the complexities of this debate in an embodied manner. So in this world, individuals are equipped with technology that empowers them to deal with niqab-wearing women by replacing them visually, which essentially mirrors the control that Quebec has over what Muslim women wear in public. And we bring this experience to life as a two-player experience that relies on computer vision, projection, and two different apps, one for the player controlling the appearance of how another appears, as well as a twine-based fiction prompting the other player to act out bodily gestures from a typical day. And testing to date confirms the main hypothesis underlying neocub, that having direct control over the appearance of flesh and blood embodied others does not feel like an ethical state of affairs. So that knot ends up connecting to this one, which is about capturing game design research, because we want to bundle this knowledge of how to design for speculative play and pass it on to others in the field. Design isn't science, and we don't think it should be studied in the same ways, but how, in that case, do we maintain something like scientific rigor? So together with my colleagues Pippin Barr and Jonathan Lussard, we're formalizing a new approach to game design research called the Method for Design Materialization. And our approach stems from the following assumptions: that knowledge is embedded in things, that design research should privilege recoverability over rigor, and that game iterations tell us a lot about a design trajectory. Contemporary software development is all about the iterations or the loops. And software builds materially embody changes in thinking. So we can use versioning software like GitHub as a means to capture playable game builds. So as a researcher, you can refer to interim game builds as evidence for a design argument. So in closing, knots are by definition knotty, they're hard, but they're also strong, and they get us to re-examine our potentially limiting normative assumptions. And in keeping with Haraway's wise words, they demand that we stay with the trouble. Thank you.
That was really great. I love the range of work that you showed here. I think for folks less familiar with this notion of bringing rigor to the design and presenting it as evidence, like, can you tell us a little bit more about how you see this materialization feeding back into practice for folks?
All right, well, for me, there are like two core ways that people can make use of materializing game design process, as it's taking place. So within design circles, design patterns are understood as referring to generally sensible solutions for design problems. They get used in architecture, interaction design, and game design. And the way in which they have traditionally been captured is that someone just has to do the work of sitting down, combing through what solutions have been used a lot, and then disseminating that knowledge in the world. So the kind of capture of iterative design work that I'm advocating encourages focus during the design process on patterns and recurring structures. And because these are all available in public online archives, they are, it becomes quite easy to document them, to find working examples complete with code. And a second key advantage is that people totally external to the design process can now directly interact with game artifacts from all stages of development. Because a lot of the time when we make claims about game design or even design in general in an academic context, we might have access to the final artifact, but a lot can change between when a project begins and when it ends. And what you can say about, based on a final product really only represents the tip of the iceberg in terms of the design thinking that went into producing that object. What I'm really excited about is the possibility that we now have a situation in which academics writing about game design can point to playable game builds as material evidence for their arguments. So I love the idea of having like playable game arguments.
That's great. It makes me think of the movement towards open science and kind of, committing your study plan. Sounds like something like that for design, which is just really cool. Thank you.